Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, April 7th, 2020, day 5 billion or so of our social isolation, and we're ready to roll with another show. Plenty to catch up on today. As a matter of fact, we have two guests lined up with us today, and our first already in place. We're early and set and ready to roll with Ian Reifowitz, who will join us to discuss his latest weekend piece, and I guess an upcoming piece as well, already in development. One which deals with, if we can get around to it, something that's been on everybody's mind since last night and this morning. The decisions, both I guess in the Wisconsin Supreme Court and in the United States Supreme Court, regarding Wisconsin's elections being held today, despite it all. So we've seen elections delayed in the United States, and we've been waiting on Supreme Court. Supreme Court. Yes. Okay. And we'll roll in just a second.
Regarding Wisconsin's.
This is interesting. I've got
feedback
from.
Okay. And we'll roll in just a second. Regarding.
I'm listening to my own show. Ian, if you're with us, let me ask you if you can mute things for just a second, and I think that'll get us out of our feedback loop. But we've been watching the reactions, and I've got some interesting and varied reactions to the situation in the two courts, and varied reactions to whether or not it makes any sense to go ahead with in-person elections today. And this has implications for November, for other states yet to vote, for states that have delayed their votes somehow and been allowed to do so by the courts up until this point. But something went wrong with Wisconsin, and we'll check in on that. But in the meantime, we also have, as I mentioned, Ian's weekend piece that deals with another phase of the election, looking ahead anyway to the general election. We'll leave aside for today, I think, for the most part, the question of whether or not we'll, have one, or whether it'll be valid, or whether it will be fairly contested, and how people will be able to vote in it, if we're still dealing with wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, this virus, another one, a different one, what have you. But assuming that all goes normally, we still need to be looking ahead and thinking hard about how as Democrats, how as candidates, our nominee how we want them to go forward, and what we're looking for them, what kind of messaging opportunities this incident with coronavirus has afforded us, what sort of messaging opportunities the overall disaster of the Trump presidency across any number of issues offer us, and how progressives might be looking to the Biden campaign to try to solidify his hold on the Democratic Party, bring out our voters, inspire them to make it to the polls, and overwhelm the Trump turnout machine, which is operating in an entirely different universe. It's very difficult to track, I think, how we think the Trump voters are doing in terms of generating the enthusiasm for their wave of voters, and that's exactly how they won last time. So it's an issue of great concern. But all right, we have Ian Reifowitz already standing by. Good morning, Ian. If you are ready to roll, we can get you back online here and unmuted. Ian, are you with us? I can hear.
Good morning, David.
Okay, you're ready. Okay, very good. Have I caught you unawares? I know we're connected, but perhaps you weren't quite ready to roll with your segment, but let me know if you need a minute. Entirely fair. We're doing everything, but this is like everybody's workplace situation now. Everybody working remotely from home, and pets jumping on keyboards, and kids running into the picture. So we're totally ready for that. Okay. Can't hear me on Skype now. Well, let's see if I can't fix some of this. Why would I'll try and think. Why don't you tell you what? Why don't you we could have you disconnect and give me another call back and see whether we get a better. How would I rate the quality of this call? I would have to rate this very low, I think, at this point, but I can't tell you why. So let's try answering again. Oops. Okay. One more time. Apparently, getting rid of the Skype call ranking is enough to say let's disconnect and quit the whole thing. All right, one more try. Maybe. Well, I'll try giving you a call. Sure. All right. Let's see. All right. Engineering issues, always something fun. All right, let's see. Now we need to get rid of that. Okay. Boy, I touched too many keyboards, and let's see. All right, we'll reboot our Skype here and see if we can't make everything work correctly. I went through the trouble of testing it all this morning to make sure that it was fine. And you know what? Guess what? It was. Maybe we're overburdening the Skype systems this time around. All right, let's try this way. Good morning, Ian. Can you hear us this time?
Good morning, Dave.
Excellent. Okay, perfect. I knew this would work eventually. It may be that the Skype gremlins are overactive, or maybe we're overburdening the system with our remote working situations all over the country. But this is a familiar problem for everybody, I think, these days. Skype or whatever it is they're using, Zoom or Slack, not quite working as planned, or as we said, kids running into the picture, maybe various states of undress, maybe, significant others doing the same. Pets almost always undressed, running into the picture, but we can deal with it. All right, so let's see. Good morning, Ian. I know I was telling everybody that you had a weekend piece and another piece in the works today, so we're going to stay right up to the moment with you today, in terms of what you've been putting out for work product for us. How is social distancing treating you so far, though?
Really not so bad.
Okay.
I will, my work schedule was fairly remote as it was, so it wasn't a huge change to go to 100%. I've got my kids at home, but they're older and they do their schoolwork, and so I've just got more company than usual.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the way it's working out for me. It's like vacation almost in a way. We're continuing to work, of course, but I worked almost entirely in isolation as it was. And now, right, there's more people around. Everybody's here. We're going to have dinner at a nice, decent hour, not having to wait for people to make it home from work or school. So, for me, it's okay. So I don't talk about it too much. I feel like I'm teasing people with that, but everybody's making do with it. But otherwise, it's working anyway. Healthy, yes. No problems there. Okay.
Yeah. No, been busy as ever. I'm thankful to be able to work from home and thankful to be able to continue to be paid. And that's not where everybody else is. Yeah. I know that. So I'm very thankful for that.
Right. I'm making allowances for all these things for everybody. But it's been okay here. But only because everybody here has agreed to listen and listen remotely. This is our mode as it happens. So okay for us. And so we're doing our best to support those who are having various difficulties, and without even getting around to the actual reason we're all in isolation, the health issues. But so far, we've made it through relatively unscathed. I think in the radio show family, I haven't heard from anybody saying that they have encountered the virus closely. So keeping my fingers crossed that continues to be the case, and knocking on various pieces of wood. But to catch up with what you've been working on during this social isolation period, I was saying, well, we've got two things going on here, both of which you've addressed in your recent writing, both the wind down, I guess, of our primary election season, but that's actually top of the news for a lot of people this morning because of the situation in Wisconsin, something you're writing about currently, and but looking ahead to the general election, which now seems like another world. just trying to get through our period of social distancing. But yes, in November, we may not be through with this particular problem, this round of coronavirus, or maybe in a second round of it, or certainly it'll be on everyone's mind as we head into, are we going to have normal conventions? Are people going to be willing to line up and stand in line, sometimes as they've had to for hours, late into the night in order to cast their ballots? We don't know. And of course, the path to getting there, how will people be coming out, and what sort of levels of enthusiasm will they be bringing with them when they go? If they bring enough enthusiasm to go. So I know you've been talking about, as you wrote over the weekend, about what you'd like to see out of the Biden campaign going forward. Do you want to just start with that, or is Wisconsin so much on your mind you want to begin
sure.
there, or how do you like to proceed?
Well, to tie it all together, since we're talking about my writing and paying the bills, I'll just mention that my writing also includes my recently published book, The Tribalization of Politics, how Rush Limbaugh's race-baiting rhetoric on the Obama presidency paved the way for Trump. How's that for a segue?
That is terrific. Well done.
Thank you.
Practiced at this. Thank you. Thank you for saving me there.
But to return to
should have done that.
Today's topics, although obviously that my writing connects all of these themes in contemporary politics. So yeah, the post I published over the weekend was called "Biden is more than an anti-Trump. He must inspire and unite voters like Obama did." And there, what I was getting at is, on the one hand, yes, obviously the central point, it can't be the only point, but the central point of the Biden message in the fall is going to be, I'm a much more competent president than Donald Trump. There's no question that is a part of it, and that the coronavirus is going to be a part of it. My advice or strategic suggestion, however you want to call it, was that that Joe Biden needs to do more of that, which again is fairly obvious. But one of the things that he needs to do more of is talk about some of the themes that were central for Barack Obama, specifically. As I wrote in the post, especially now with the pandemic having further revealed the truth of our interconnectedness as Americans, Biden's rhetoric needs to evoke our sense of community and nationhood, of being a single people tied together by a shared fate, of being, as Obama so often called us, quote, one American family, end quote. And this is, of course, I shouldn't say of course, this, as you know, David, this was the subject of my previous book, which looked at Obama's conception of American national identity and the way he talked about the importance on which he placed of really strengthening our bonds as Americans across lines of race and religion and ethnicity and culture. Something that, on the one hand, at the time I said, yes, obviously all presidents seek to do this, but Obama, put extra effort into doing this and talked about it in a really important and sophisticated way. Of course, now since 2017, we have a president for the first time in many decades, at least, who has no interest in doing the kinds of things that I just mentioned Obama did. So I had to sort of take back in my mind, at least, what I wrote in 2012, that other presidents, Bush and Clinton and others had done this, just Obama did it better. Trump is literally doing the opposite with the kinds of things, in Charlottesville and the comments about Mexican immigrants. And Biden hasn't ignored this completely. He said, in fact, if I remember right, Biden's initial announcement for president talked about Trump's hate and him, and how Biden would try to heal. And I think that's great. And Biden has done some of that. He did it really well, actually, in the night he won South Carolina with some of his unprepared remarks. He did it nicely in a CNN town hall recently. But what I argued in the post was that Obama has some very specific themes. Biden can even quote Obama. Certainly he loves to talk about his time as vice president, as well he should. It's an important part of it's probably the most important part of his resume. Yes. But I said it's time for a few more from Biden, a few more renditions of, as Barack said, and he can certainly use some of these themes, one American family, from the Obama presidency. And one of the things I looked at historically was, I connected I drew some parallels between the 2020 race and two previous races that gave me some concern. One of them was 2004, where I argued that John Kerry literally, in his, if you think about what John Kerry's message was, you really can't, I argued, come up with anything other than, what he said at his campaign, at his convention acceptance speech, where he said, "I'm John Kerry and I'm reporting for duty." I mean, literally, he basically said, "I'm John Kerry and I'm not George W. Bush. Vote for me." Biden can't do that.
Yeah. Okay. True.
And I went back to 1988, where Michael Dukakis, again, the thing you probably most remember about his campaign was also his convention speech, where he said, "This campaign, I'm not going to do my Dukakis imitation. Actually, you know what? I am going to do my Dukakis imitation.
I'm ready for that.
This campaign is not about ideology. It's about competence." All right. No, again, that's another trap that Joe Biden can't fall into. And by the way, I hope you never again have to hear anybody do a Michael Dukakis imitation.
It's a rare thing now.
Thank you. And I argue that Biden has to avoid falling into this trap. It's not just 2020 can't just be about competence, and Biden can't just be not Trump. And obviously, I said in the post, Biden, I'm not worried about him falling into this Dukakis, especially trap of saying the election is not about ideology. Biden is obviously going to talk and has already talked about, how his policies are different and his values are different from Trump. So I'm not suggesting, it's not like I think Biden is going to fall off a cliff here, but I think that there is something very powerful in a campaign against Donald Trump from specifically using this idea of one American family, of cross-ethnic unity that Obama spoke about. Yes, from his own experiences, and Biden can't talk about them in the same exact way that Obama did. But like I said, why not just quote the man, right? As my good friend Barack said, we are one American family, and he can go into some of those themes. So that was the point of the post. I've given you kind of a brief overview there, and I'm happy to talk about any other aspects of it that you like before we move on to the post that I'm working on now, which touches on Wisconsin and the elections.
Well, yeah, I wondered about, I can see the obvious value to it. I'm wondering, I don't know that we have any particular insight into the strategic thinking of the Biden campaign yet. It's, of course, not the general election period quite yet. And the disruption of the coronavirus has left us with a lot less data about how a general election campaign might be conducted. As our candidates are more or less removed from the public eye, and not a whole lot of campaign interaction going on out there. I'm curious though about, and maybe this requires insight into Biden's personality, but I'm imagining that he's being advised to balance things very carefully between hearkening back to glory days or hanging his candidacy on Barack Obama and Barack Obama's record versus now is the time to be establishing yourself as your own, as your own person, your own figure, and leading in your own way, and defining for people who might still not know who is Joe Biden and what is he all about, and finding, I'm sure, that there are people advising, you need to strike a balance here between the two. And I guess that's the easiest solution. But I'm sure a conundrum for him, and I'm sure he's being pulled in two different directions. But how much of this do you think changes? Does this, ordinarily I would say that's also an excellent primary election strategy. The field, of course, has narrowed considerably, but even when he had the opportunity to be running on the Obama record a little more overtly, I didn't feel like that's what he was doing, and I wondered whether either you disagreed or whether you thought maybe he had been doing more of it, or and you'd like to see that continue, or there wasn't enough there to satisfy your hope that you would see more of it in the late primary period or into the general. What did you make of it was kind of a spotty record even before we all went into social isolation. Biden didn't really define himself in terms of how he was going to campaign at all, as far as I could tell.
Right. I think one of the things I wrote is that at least in the primary, he did talk about Obama and he talked about some of the work they'd done there. But his primary way of, I think, separating himself from the other candidates was largely about job performance. I can do a better job than Trump, and then also electability. I can beat Trump. Obviously, you're not going to, in a general election, talk about I can beat Trump. That's a primary message. And the I can do a better job than Trump is still going to be obviously central, as I said. The thing I'm talking about here is less about, in this post, is less about the specific record and the specific policies, although I think healthcare is going to be the one where he's going to want to draw on the record, but he's going to draw on the record of the Obama-Biden administration, but also he's obviously talking about expanding Obamacare and the public option and this, the concept of Medicare for all of those who want it, which is basically the public option. So that's going to be key because the healthcare is something that is still open and going forward.
True.
The thing I'm talking about here in the post is more about rhetoric and about a vision that honestly is something that, the idea of talking about Democrats specifically being the party of American national unity across ethnic lines, of inclusion. And inclusion is a word I didn't mention earlier, but I'll mention now. Inclusion is so important. That's something that's going to be an evergreen issue for Democrats going forward, at least until the point at which I hope at some point in the future, Republicans just completely repudiate Trumpism and the kind of racial demagoguery that they've used going back to Nixon and the Southern strategy, right? I mean, that's Republicans have been doing that for a very, very long time, with the possible exception. I give George W. Bush a little bit of credit, although he didn't race bait. At least there was no Willie Horton. There was no, some of the things that Reagan did, but George W. Bush aside, and he had plenty of other failings. Republicans have been doing the Southern strategy since Nixon, or even you want to say since Goldwater when they opposed the Voting Rights Act. So until that's gone, this is an evergreen issue. But for Biden specifically, it's a way of presenting Americans with a vision, tying himself to Obama, but even just the content of what Obama said is so important. Just as we quote FDR, Democratic candidates quote FDR on the New Deal, I think Democratic candidates are going to be talking in the language of Barack Obama when it comes to inclusion for decades. And why wouldn't they? And there's no question in the end, whatever Biden says, he's running for Obama's third term. There's no way around that. Al Gore sort of tried to get around it, but there's no Barack Obama had none of the downsides of Bill Clinton. So there's literally no reason to not do that. Yes. You can get a little fancy and you get a little subtle, but everybody knows that that's what we're talking about here. This is a continuation, a restoration of the Obama-Biden, a choice between the restoration of Obama-Biden and a continuation of Trump. But these themes of inclusion and unity are a direct contrast to Trump. So they're not being used in a vacuum. They are vital and present because of the kinds of things that Trump has done and the kinds of whatever the opposite of inclusion, I guess, exclusionary rhetoric and exclusionary policies that, right up till now that Trump has engaged in. I mentioned in the post, it's not just Charlottesville and the remark about there being very fine people on both sides of a march where neo-Nazis were on one side. And it's not just about his announcing for the White House by talking about Mexican immigrants as rapists and drug dealers. Just look what he did this month with the virus, the Chinese virus. He even crossed out, as I'm sure everybody knows, he crossed out coronavirus in his notes so that he made sure he said Chinese virus. I mean, he's race baiting on the virus. So this is an issue that is contemporary. It is present, and there's no better formulation of it that Biden can draw on than the formulation presented by Barack Obama.
Well, yes, it does continue to be an issue. And a good point, pointing out that he's managed to charge the coronavirus issue with his own racism and race baiting. That was fairly amazing. And then he's, by the way, made a pretty distinct turnaround since then, since getting on the phone with Chinese President Xi Jinping and speaking with him, and then I think basically coming out at the other end with a business arrangement with the Chinese. But yeah, he's abandoned that for the moment. So I guess in the end, his business interests outweigh his interest in race baiting. I'm sure he can come back to it at some other point, or simply bait based on some other racist sentiment that he has, if not anti-Chinese sentiment. So
well, you just made the point that I think is the single, and good for you, David, the single most important point about understanding republicanism, period. And that is, race baiting is the political tactic that they use to achieve their ultimate goal, which is lining their pockets.
Ah, okay. I have stumbled into it.
One is the tool to achieve the other. You use race baiting to distract white working class voters into voting against their own interests and to, in their minds, focus. And this is what I wrote about in the book about Limbaugh, and Trump does the same thing. Get white working class voters to think that black and brown people and immigrants are their enemy, and then they'll vote for the Republicans, who in reality, when they get in, will do things like cut taxes on the 1% and do nothing for the white working class or for working class voters or middle class voters, really of any background. But those racial tactics and Chinese virus and Mexican rapists and all these other things are about making sure that there is never a strong enough working and middle class cross-racial coalition to beat them. Obama was able to put together that coalition, and I think that's why his rhetoric is so important. His language and his themes are so important. Biden can hopefully do the same thing.
All right. Well, I'm glad I wandered into a decent point somewhere along the line, and that we had you on hand to explain it to people before I wandered off of that spot. So I appreciate that. Yeah, that's something we'll have to keep an eye on. We're going to take a short break, and maybe we can transition to Wisconsin afterwards. But yeah, I suppose that's always something he can pull out of his pocket. Certainly the message sunk in with his supporters out there in Trump world, and though he no longer uses the same phrasing, people have taken the message to heart and are on their own harassing Chinese American citizens wherever they find them. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We have Ian Reifowitz with us here discussing a couple of articles. One just published this weekend and one upcoming. And let's see, we've been talking a little bit about, in case you're just joining us, the Biden candidacy as the primary election campaign season appears to be winding down, even as people are voting in Wisconsin, probably our next topic. We've been discussing his weekend article, Ian's weekend article. Biden is more than just an anti-Trump, but he must inspire and unite voters like Obama did. And as we're speaking, I'm seeing an enormous number of pictures and video pouring in, by the way, from Wisconsin, conditions at the polling places that are open today. And I guess one of the things, in addition to the primary going forward and a Supreme Court election there happening in Wisconsin at the same time, in addition to the fact that they've decided to go ahead with in-person voting, or rather the courts have decided that they must go ahead with in-person voting, they have a understandable shortage of poll workers and are condensing the number of polling places down. Because of this, they're just not able to, I guess, to open as many polling places, and so that just increases the size of the crowds having to find lower number of of polling places out there. And so pictures and video from all over the place of people doing their best, I guess, at social distancing while waiting in line to vote, which only makes, of course, the line look that much longer. People out there in masks lined up outside in the early morning hours, and even places before they opened had lines around the block. So not much in the way of helping people remain. Certainly, they can't remain at home and can't remain socially distant. But I'm glad, I guess, that at least people are finding ways to get out as opposed to abandoning the whole enterprise. But I hope we're not hearing stories of illness spreading in Wisconsin in anywhere from, I guess, 5 days to 2 weeks. But I don't know if you've been able to see any of those pictures across your screen, whether you have Twitter or any other social media open at the moment, Ian. But
Well, no, I haven't seen the pictures. I am thinking about what I read about what's going on in Milwaukee. Although, if I can just say one more thing is from our previous segments to thank you for giving me the opportunity to do something I've had in my pocket for about 30 years, which is my Michael Dukakis impression. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. We're available for that anytime.
So no, what's going on in Wisconsin is part of something much larger that I am working on. As you mentioned, it's the post tentatively is called why do we have elections? Republicans think the only legitimate purpose is to put power in their hands, and what's going on in Wisconsin is a perfect example of that. About what's going on there, even though I can't see it, what I know from reading Daily Codes from our elections expert Stephen Wolf is that there are supposed to be 180 in-person polling places in Milwaukee, but in fact there are only going to be 5. And of course, Milwaukee is the Democratic, along with Madison, is the Democratic stronghold of the state. The largest black population in Wisconsin is in Milwaukee, and of course, in-person voting, having 5 locations versus 180, completely disadvantages or disfranchises the population of Milwaukee, and it's no accident that that's what's happening, and it's no accident that that's why Wisconsin Republicans, who dominate the state legislature, despite having lost the statewide popular vote by 8 points. That's another thing I mentioned, right? In 2018, they lost the statewide popular vote for the assembly by 8 points, but they have 63 out of 99 seats. So again, why bother having elections?
Yes.
Wisconsin is the only state in the country that has an election in March that has not postponed it. Why do you think all the other states have postponed it? Well, here's why. The elections in the other states are essentially primaries. Democrats are running against Democrats, Republicans are running against Republicans. But you mentioned this. Here in Wisconsin, in addition to a lot of local races, there is a statewide race which has essentially its general election today. So that's the election for state Supreme Court. So that's a reason why in Wisconsin Republicans have a race that's a Republican versus a Democrat. So they actually have some skin in the game, and partisan advantage is what they're looking to take. In-person voting, or mandating that the in-person voting go on, and that they don't do the kinds of things to make a postponement or going to vote by mail that would give Democratic constituencies a roughly equal chance. They're not going to do that, because for them all that matters is winning. There is no principle, and it's something I've written before, and I'm mentioning it again today. Literally, there's no principle Republicans operate under when it comes to deciding on whether to what kind of process to support. There's no principle other than what process is going to get us more victories. That's the only principle, and there are real contrasts there. Your home state of Virginia. You live in Virginia, right? I'm not making that up.
No, but
right. Your home state of Virginia. Look at what Democrats did there in the state house after winning the trifecta. Did they do what Wisconsin Republicans did and gerrymander the hell out of the state so that that they could do things like lose the popular vote by 8 points and still have a 2/3 majority? No, they did the opposite, and they joined with Republicans to continue this 2-step, I think, or maybe even 3-step process of moving towards nonpartisan redistricting with a commission. Not every Democrat in the Assembly voted for it, but enough of the in the House of Delegates, but enough of them did, and all of them basically did in the state Senate. And Democrats there voted, even though they had the power to do the opposite. They voted to preserve the integrity of elections, even at the disadvantage of their own partisan gain. And that is a principle. That shows that they are principled, and not every state, Democrats aren't always doing that, but they are doing it in Virginia, and maybe they're going to be doing it in other states going forward, upholding the principle that elections, the point of an election is to figure out who the voters want, not simply to make sure Republicans win. But in Wisconsin today, we're seeing that principle at its most naked in the way that Republicans are acting. The legislature, by refusing to go along with Governor Evers on postponing the election or going to all vote by mail, the Wisconsin State Supreme Court by rejecting Evers' attempt to postpone the election, and even the U.S. Supreme Court with its 5-4 conservative majority blocking even the measure to give absentee voters a few extra days to submit their ballots. Just right on down the line, it's how do we win, and let's fix the election in whatever way we have to, including putting people's lives and health at stake in order so that we, the Republicans, can have the best chance of winning possible. Disgusting.
Yeah, well, par for the course for Wisconsin Republicans in particular. I mean, this has been a program that they've been on for quite some time, and national Republicans as well. But Wisconsin's been a really glaring hot spot, especially during the Scott Walker years, where it was, again, about as naked as it could possibly be. It was very clear from early on that they were interested in, this sort of gimmitarian approach to everything, but in elections in particular. But this has been an issue for a long time with the composition of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, with the powers afforded to the governor's office, with the immediate attempt by the Republican legislature to strip a newly elected Democratic governor of all of his, as much of his powers as possible, and move them over to the legislature, powers that have never resided in the legislature in Wisconsin or really almost any other state. So certainly no surprise what's going on here, and I guess that's the key reason, as you pointed out. There's been relatively little difficulty in postponing elections in other states where Republicans didn't stand to lose any of the grip they had on power by allowing them to be delayed. But once there was a partisan advantage that they had arranged for, or were willing to, or interested in capitalizing on, an additional one that had been dumped on their lap by the coronavirus, they suddenly found the will to stop one state from doing what a dozen have already done, and several or others are likely to still do, delay the elections until they're safe to vote in. Well, who cares about safety so long as we might be able to steal a Supreme Court seat, and or for that matter, on the national level, who cares about normality of process and regular order in the United States Senate, voting on people who had been nominated to the Supreme Court or holding their nominations open for over a year in the hopes that it would all go away eventually. These are all in the Republican playbook, and they're not afraid to use it. And I don't know. I guess without commenting on whether or not Democrats ought to be doing the same thing, the point is that they're not.
Right. I mean, and that's the connection I made. That's the post I wrote a couple of weeks ago, was about the court, not just Merrick Garland, but what McConnell has been doing recently, calling around these older Republican judges, right, and trying to get them to retire early. It's all part of the same. It's all part of the same unprincipled rejection of democracy. And you can see the parallel just in Ohio, where literally the exact same thing that the Democratic governor of Wisconsin tried to do, namely postpone the election at the last minute after the lower court had said he couldn't. Governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, did that for the March, I think, 17th primaries, and no Republicans said boo. Why? Because it was just a primary. So clearly there was no advantage to be gained in terms of, unless you really want to game it out between Biden and Sanders, or whatever, but they couldn't win a seat or steal a seat or whatever. So, hey, in Ohio, Republican governor cancels the election at the last minute, Republicans are fine with it. 2.5 weeks later, when a Democrat tries to do the same thing for the same reason, oh no, now suddenly it's the end of our republic as we know it, to paraphrase Kentucky Representative Thomas Massey, who said that about mail by voting. I mean, this connects to what was going on with the coronavirus stimulus legislation of a couple of weeks ago, right? Democrats in the House tried to put in funding and set up structures for mail-in voting, and Thomas Massey said, it'll be the end of the republic as we know it. And Trump, of course, said, well, if you do the things that the Democrats were going to do in the House, and I'm making him sound smarter than he actually did, because I can't remember how dumb his own words were, but if you do the things that Democrats are doing, the one word I remember was, it'll be quote-unquote crazy. And he said, and you'll get levels of voting such that no Republican will ever be elected again. And that reveals their thinking. Yes. It's not about what's right. It's not about what's good for democracy. It's about we'll never win again if people vote. Yeah. Right. And that goes back to 1980. This is, again, to the thing I'm going to talk about. You might remember Paul Weyrich, right?
Yes.
Right? Created the term moral majority, which, as I said in the post, his followers were neither moral nor a majority. But he has this famous quote. He says, I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by the majority of the people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage, and he's talking about conservative Republicans, our leverage in the election, quite candidly, goes up as the voting percentage goes down. And that's what Republicans have always been about. That's, and that's why that's why I'm asking this question, in the headline, why bother having elections, given what Republicans see them as merely an avenue to take power. And I don't know, that Democrats should, on the one hand, roll over, but I certainly respect what Virginia Democrats are doing. And what I'd like to think is that voters will respect the principled approach to the degree that they will then vote for the people who are actually protecting their democracy. Maybe the partisan Republicans won't, but as we know, the country is nationally, at least roughly speaking, 1/3 Republican, 1/3 Democrat, maybe a few more percentage Democrats, and then another third that are quote unquote independents. If I was an independent and I had a choice between a party that says, screw fairness in elections, we're just going to do whatever we can to take advantage, and another party that says, well, yeah, we actually respect the will of the voters and want to give democracy a chance, I would consider voting for the party that wants to give democracy a chance. So maybe there's some benefit to being principled. It's hard because on other occasions I feel like what they did with Merrick Garland, for example, was so wrong that it has to be undone. But maybe you undo it so that you can then put in better, fairer, principled processes, right? Because if you don't remove the unfair advantage Republicans have, you won't even be able to put in the fair processes, and that's what you're seeing in Wisconsin, where, as we said, the Democrats won the popular vote for statewide by 8 points and have maybe barely 1/3 of the seats in the state legislature. If the system can't be changed, even in the wavest of wave elections, then I don't know what you do. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, well, we find ourselves in that position on a number of issues where you just say, I don't even know how to proceed from here. They've done such awful things and put so many barriers in place. And also, I guess I'm just thinking of the mixed feelings, I guess, I have about how Democrats handle these things. On the one hand, a great principled stance being taken in Virginia, and you hope, and sometimes you lose hope along the way, but you're supposed to be hoping that, principled citizens, even Republicans who aren't just simply an ideological lost cause, no pun intended there, I guess, with the lost causers of Virginia and the rest of the South, but
Robert
people
E.
who
Lee
aren't,
and all that, yeah.
Yes, people who aren't lost to us in terms of persuadability, or at least their ability to see that they have that we're working here for the good of the country, and it makes sense for democracy to be able to reflect the will of the people, even if they sometimes lose. There are such Republicans. They're not often elected officials, but there are such people out there. But sometimes I very often we find ourselves disappointed by them or disappointed by the fact that they find themselves perhaps outnumbered by such staunch partisans in their own party that they're overwhelmed, and it ends up looking for all the world like all Republicans simply operate this way. And on the other hand, we have situations, I guess, thinking specifically about what changes might be necessary in our approach to judicial nominations or the composition of the Supreme Court in the near future, and thinking about the way, for instance, Senator Leahy has handled things while he's been in charge of the Judiciary Committee for Democrats when there's a Democratic majority in the Senate, and watching him fall back on Democratic, as speaking of, I guess, capital D Democratic Party principles and lowercase Democratic principles as well, but in restoring the blue slip rules, for instance, when Orrin Hatch first time around simply did away with them piecemeal as the situation demanded to give Republicans a partisan advantage, chipped away at it until it was essentially undone. And it was Pat Leahy's pledge at that point that if Democrats were rewarded with the majority in the Senate, he would restore those good old fair rules for everybody. And he went ahead and did so. And it cost, it cost President Obama the opportunity to fill a lot of these court vacancies that the Trump White House has filled instead, after retaking the Senate and once again doing away with those blue slip rules that Leahy had been at such pains to restore. And so that's clearly ineffectual, and I'm sure it drives partisan Democrats crazy, but even people who are, I guess, who aren't quite so driven, people who might see or see the benefit of a Virginia approach, you're not even going to get the opportunity to take that kind of approach and to be fair and principled unless you push back aggressively enough on the damage Republicans have done while they've been in office. So this too requires a balance.
Right. I mean, on the one hand, the blue slip thing is not about democracy. It's about, courtesy, and Republicans have shown certainly that they're just discourteous to their colleagues. So essentially screw that, right? But gerrymandering is something different, right? You're talking about literally making elections uncompetitive in 95% of the districts, which is very different, obviously, from not giving home state senators a veto power over court nominations by a president. You could never win an election by saying they got rid of the blue slips and we won't. That's true. Right. But you can run an election by saying, listen, if you put them in power, they'll make sure that they never give up power. You're electing one party rule, at least in the way that they're creating these electoral districts. So please, voters, don't do that. If you want to have a choice in 2 and 4 and 6 years, don't elect them, because they won't let you have that choice. And people are not. I know you had this whole idea about I don't even remember what green eye shade means, but something about green eye shade, and people sort of glaze over when you talk about sort of statistics and things. But you can say to people, listen, they set up a system where they lost the popular vote by 8 points and got 63 out of 99 seats, 2/3 of the seats. That's not democracy. If you want democracy, elect us, and we will put in fair rules, and that will mean that you'll have a choice 2 and 4 and 6 years from now. If you want to protect your democracy, don't vote for the party that will get rid of your democracy. That's an electoral argument that you can make. It can't be the only argument you make. Obviously, the election has to be about much more than that. But there are people at the margins who are reached by different messages. And that's a message that I think can reach certainly some nonpartisan independents within that 1/3, people who can go back and forth between the two parties, but who if you can move 2% of the vote on that issue in a close election, 2% is certainly enough to have made President Hillary Clinton. We know that. In 2% in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. You can move 2% of the people with a principled argument, then make the principled argument.
Yes, I mean, that's an excellent point. I thought very well put and very succinct. I think it makes a great, we even make a great debate point, right? You vote for the party that will allow you to have a choice in how the country works. I know there are a lot of people who agree in principle with the ideology of Republicans, I guess, and maybe even, I'm sure there's plenty who agree, oh, this is great. If we would never lose an election again and we got to do whatever we wanted, that's true. But yeah, I think that's put pretty succinctly. If you value the ability to see your vote counted and count for something and changing the way the country, the state, your localities, whatever, are governed, then there's really only one choice you could make, and that's the party that will preserve your ability to make that choice.
Right, and you wrap that argument in the flag and the Constitution, and I don't mean that cynically. I mean that in a positive way. If something is presented to me as more American, that makes me want to vote for it more because I respect and identify as positively with Americanness and with America. You know, the founding fathers wanted elections. The Constitution wanted elections. You know, Abraham Lincoln wanted elections. Mitch McConnell doesn't want elections. He wants coronations, right? Yes. I mean, it's, the Wisconsin Republicans, I don't remember their names. Voss, I believe, is the state's House Speaker. They don't want elections. They are, what they're doing is un-American.
Yeah,
well, that's a pretty powerful argument.
I think so. Now, at the moment, I'm sure they would counter, and this would be a rather cynical argument. Well, okay, but we are having one today only because Republicans insisted on it. Democrats wanted to delay, and who knows whether they were ever going to get around to having the elections. And in fact, it's not the same sort of election they want. They want everybody to stay home and mail things in, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we saw Trump the other day insist that mail-in ballots equals cheating, although we also saw people juxtaposing that insistence with his previous insistence on being given an absentee ballot, which is, of course, mailed in. No real... I don't know why it is that people separate, if they do, maybe only Republicans, separate the two in their mind, mailing in your ballot, generally speaking, versus absentee ballot, but... that's just one of their talking points. But they've been awfully explicit, and Trump in particular, just because he always blurts out the quiet part out loud, has been very explicit. I think just the other day, he was the way he put it was that his response, by the way, to the coronavirus crisis was so good and so perfect that really, in all fairness, Democrats ought not even to be allowed to win the next election. If that should somehow happen, maybe we might have to undo it, because clearly it would be unfair and un-American for Americans to decide that they wanted Democrats to handle things, given how well he had done, which is absurd on many levels. But just focusing on the question of how Republicans view elections as this annoyance that we might have to go through because something, founding fathers, whatever. But so, as long as we win them, they're okay. If we don't, though, that's clearly evidence that there's something wrong, something illegal has happened, and we need to undo it. But rather amazing to see him say so explicitly, and he's not the only one. And party leaders in other states have said much the same. And as you pointed out, Paul Weyrich. So this has been going on for a long time. How they, I don't know. I guess it never mattered what the name of their party was. Republicans, very down on participation in the Republic all of a sudden.
Well, yeah. I mean, look at the Bush versus Gore 2000 decision. The Supreme Court elected a president, and it said in the notes, in the opinion, this case is not applicable as a precedent to any other case. In other words, we did what we needed to do in this case, and don't think you can use these principles about equal treatment of ballots in any other cases. Well, how much more blatant is it? Do you want it than that? Well, we decided the way we did in this case because we needed to elect George W. Bush.
Yeah. And that was it. End of the story. And nobody has paid any real attention to that being such a unique case. and that it shouldn't be available for citation as precedent. But as people have needed it, they've cited it anyway.
Right, or the Electoral College. I mean, you listen to the way Republicans defend the Electoral College, and you can literally, there's no question that if the Electoral College defended Democrats, that they would easily flip and make the exact opposite argument. I think the Electoral College is wrong because it is not democratic, and I would make that same argument. Just like the Virginia Democrats, I would make that same argument even if it meant that Democrats would have not as good a chance of winning. The Electoral College clearly makes it such that Republicans can win when they have at least, 46, 47% of the popular vote. They're in the game. And this argument that the elections, if they didn't have the Electoral College and it was just a popular vote, then we'd have to, then rural areas would be ignored. Well, first of all, areas don't vote. People vote, right? True. Land mass doesn't vote. People vote. And right now, 40 out of the 50 states are ignored. Any state that's not Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, North Carolina, at this time, Arizona, maybe Georgia, Minnesota, the 10 closest states are the only ones that get any attention anyway. And within those states, the metropolitan areas get the attention because that's where the votes are there. And and they're winner-take-all states. The Electoral College is another example clearly where the principle of democracy is not where Republicans are concerned about at all. It's only this helps us, and Trump says it out loud, and the rest of us know it and think it, and that's why we Republicans continue to back this absurd, undemocratic 18th century monstrosity.
Yes, true. They've found their advantage in it, and they intend to keep it. Meanwhile, we now find ourselves at the end of our first hour, another example of the big ideas that Ian Reifowitz always brings to bear, somehow expanding to fill this time. These are things we could be talking about forever, every day. I appreciate your coming by. If there's, and do let me know, by the way, even during the break, if there's another idea we need to squeeze in, I'm happy to have. We've got no pressing issue in the first 5 minutes of the next segment, so certainly we can wrap up that way. Otherwise, thanks again. Welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I know that was a little bit awkward because of the way our timing worked out, but Ian's still here just so we can wrap up. And we all want everyone to have closure. I don't want anybody upset about that. But Ian, thanks very much for coming by. I think we did actually find our way to a nice closure of our points over the first hour, but I did want to give you a chance to wrap up and offer any final thoughts, and mention the book one more time perhaps, and let everybody know again your next upcoming piece addresses a lot of this stuff too, and when might we see that?
Well, thank you, David. And the next piece, depending on scheduling, should go onto the site, onto Daily Kos, I would guess in about 2 days maybe. We're still finalizing and editing and things like that, and it will be called something along the lines of "Why do we have elections? Republicans think that the only legitimate purpose is to put power in their hands." So thanks for giving me the chance to come on and talk about that. And for your radio audience who can't see it, I'm holding up a copy of my book.
I see it now.
Which is called "The Tribalization of Politics: How Rush Limbaugh's Race-Baiting Rhetoric on the Obama Presidency Paved the Way for Trump." So if anybody's interested, they can get that at Amazon or any other online booksellers. They all, it's carried in all those places. And I look forward to seeing all of you in the comment section, maybe on Daily Kos. I have usually have a front page article every, 6 to 10 days, something like that. And I want to thank you again, David, for having me on and giving me the chance to talk and to share some ideas with you. I always enjoy it.
I appreciate it, and it's always a great way to. It was very nice, also, I think, to just take a day off from intense focus on every moment's occurrence in the coronavirus world. So appreciate that, and thanks for helping us out with that. And we'll look forward to the next upcoming piece. And I guess with Wisconsin on everyone's mind, it'll make a lot of sense and will resonate with a lot of people in a different way as we watch this happening right before our eyes. Thanks again. I appreciate it, and we'll catch up with you again soon, I hope. Probably as your next piece approaches the front page. But do give us a call if there's something you can occupy our minds with this way in the near future. Take care and stay well. Okay. Let's see. Let's move on then from here. Oh, thanks very much to Ian Reifowitz once again for joining us for the first hour. Lots happening. As I said, I've been collecting along the way just video and pictures and commentary from people pointing out the difficulties that people are having in Wisconsin. I'm very curious to see how this election, how the results come out, what the effects were, what turnout was like, and unfortunately, I will also have to keep an eye out on Wisconsin's health figures with respect to the coronavirus and COVID-19, and for the next 2 weeks, we'll have to see whether this had any ill effects. My hope is that, certainly we know the value of social distancing and how helpful it supposedly, we hope, is in suppressing the spread of the virus. All I can do is say, I hope that the lessons we've been turned in terms of our last resorts, our last defenses against the spread of the virus are sufficient, that we don't see any spike in the numbers. There's a lot of there's more distancing going on than there's ordinarily the case. That seems clear. Whether or not people are maintaining 6 feet or not, that's not the true measure of what's going to happen. Measuring and finding out that, if it's 5'9", it's not going to work. If it's 6'2", it can't possibly transmit the virus. But there's an awful lot of people waiting in line in masks. That's going to cut down, by the way, on, I think, the range of the droplets that we're all expelling, certainly. So that's good news, and people will be, I'm sure, washing their hands vigorously once they get back home. Probably a lot of the people will, I know a lot of people are vigilant about shedding the clothing and showering up after any excursion outside into a crowded place or a grocery store. So my hope is that everybody's training and, I don't know if we can call it paranoia or not, but caution with respect to the virus will keep the numbers down in terms of the spread. And I guess among people who think it's all a hoax, maybe it'll take root with them instead, except they'll, I'm sure, get out and spread it among the rest of us as well. So you hope for that. But you do hope that everybody's, the caution that they're exercising will make it possible for them to have gone through this stupid exercise forced on them by the Supreme Court and by some measures the slow reaction of the Democratic governor, their Governor Evers, to actually try and call things off before the last minute. I've seen a couple of opinions out there from lay experts to lawyers to everything in between to people who just found out about this yesterday but are somehow experts on it. But a couple of expressions of opinion that maybe it wasn't entirely out of keeping with certain democratic principles, at least in a decision at the U.S. Supreme Court level, that floating the idea that it's not absolutely and entirely without justification to say that elections that were scheduled to go forward in a matter of hours ought not to be so easily postponed. But certainly we have known for several weeks that it was a decision that would have to be made eventually, and that other states have made it at almost game time decisions and been able to make it work as well. The difference, I think, between those elections and this one, pointed out capably by Ian here, that there's a Republican power grab at stake here, which is what sets it apart from the others. I also happen to have, in collecting all of these photos and videos of people lining up, there's also been a lot of commentary, of course, to the contrary, saying that it is absolutely ridiculous. And that argument is easy to understand too. Absolutely ridiculous to force people to be out of their homes and lined up. And I mean, really, honestly, even minus, absent the coronavirus issue, people have been arguing for a long time. People who have been arguing for election reforms, in particular for vote by mail, that it's always ridiculous to force people to leave their homes and line up, even without the threat of disease, to cast their ballots when they could just as easily be doing it from home. And in fact, all states allow people to do that, depending on, in some instances, and this is sort of a weird thing that we don't standardize this across the country, but that's our federalist system for you. But depending on what excuse people are willing to give their state authorities. In some places there is, as they say, no excuse absentee voting. That is, that you don't need to give a reason, valid or otherwise, for requesting an absentee ballot. You request it, and it's a valid request. We'll give it to you, and your ballot will be counted, period. No questions asked. Other states, and Virginia, I think, is still included among them, require you to offer an explanation why you are seeking an absentee ballot. They don't grill you. You're not tortured or anything. But you have to give an answer. And I suppose there are some people who are really, would be deeply concerned about giving the correct answer and would feel bad about, I guess, people who would be upset about making something up if you had to. I've certainly made requests for absentee ballots in situations where I was not entirely certain I would be absent for the entirety of the voting day on that date, but I was pretty sure it was going to get in the way and be on my mind, and I would want my vote recorded if I didn't make it back home in time to get online at 7 p.m. on election day. And so, they ask me, what's your reason? I'll be traveling. I'll be out of state that day. Will I be out of state until 7 p.m.? No, I'll be back in the state, but I won't necessarily be home in time to vote in my precinct. But, isn't that good enough? And certainly, I assume that my guess is that there are many, many people who just say, yeah, I'm going to be traveling, that I'm going to be out of state. And they just, in fact, really don't want to go and stand in line and vote, or even when there aren't huge lines at their polling places. I don't want to be bothered by people trying to shove sample ballots in my face on my way into the polling place, or whatever it is. Or I have I've got an injury, or I will have had surgery that's scheduled for near that time, and I don't want to make my way physically to the polling places. All of those are available as excuses, and I don't know of anybody who's ever been investigated in Virginia for giving an answer that someone in officialdom found unconvincing. I guess the real problem, though, is that absentee ballots are sometimes handled, as an afterthought for those counting the ballots. They only really look. Sometimes I think they don't even bother necessarily to look at absentee ballots and how they've been cast unless there's a mathematical possibility that they would make a difference in the elections as the count currently stands. But if everybody was voting by mail, then obviously that wouldn't be an operative excuse. Anyway, just interesting to see the commentary accompanying these photos and videos. I happen to have one that I grabbed. It's a tweet thread from Nan Aaron, who is a president of, how do they style themselves these days? The Alliance for Justice, which used to be known, it's an organization that's been around for a while, but it used to be known under a different name, People for the American Way, which is interesting that they decided to go, I guess they thought that this was a more pointed branding, Alliance for Justice versus People for the American Way, but which might come in handy, actually, in this instance, particularly in pushing forward the strategy that Ian was outlining and discussing earlier, that just saying, if you're for the American way, that is having a choice between the parties or several candidates or what have you in any upcoming election. In an election that matters how the majority actually feels, then you need to be with us. And Alliance for Justice is, I guess, it's nice, it's broad. I don't know exactly what their thinking was in terms of the rebranding. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Nan Aaron, though, observing about Wisconsin, Republicans have exploited a global health pandemic to deny Wisconsinites basic access to democracy. Is that what we call them, Wisconsinites? I guess so. Republicans can no longer hide their intent to suppress the vote. She's illustrating her point with one of the videos. This one, a video of from Stedman, who says, here's a better sense of how the Milwaukee lines look at just 7:30. Again, most people wearing masks, trying to space. But Nan Aaron continues after saying, pointing out the Republicans are exploiting the global health pandemic to deny basic access to democracy. From Republican state lawmakers to the Republican-controlled state Supreme Court to the Republican-controlled U.S. Supreme Court, we saw an unabashed willingness to force people to choose between protecting their health or exercising a core constitutional right. Through no fault of their own, untold thousands will have no opportunity to cast their vote, all because Republicans believe they stand to benefit from poor turnout. Today's unprecedented events just go to show how fragile the simple right to vote can be and how important it is to support fair-minded jurists like Jill Karofsky, who is the Democratic Supreme Court, State Supreme Court Justice up for election today. I guess we should probably run through that, by the way. Do we have something front page at the moment? I can tell you this, right up near the top of the recommended list of posts from the community over at Daily Kos is the diary of Semdem, S-E-M-D-E-M, you all know, Semdem, and entitled, She's Why SCOTUS's Partisan 5-4 Decision is Forcing Wisconsin to Vote in Person on Tuesday. Daniel Kelly is the right-wing judge who was appointed by Governor Scott Walker to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The court is currently 4-3 in its split, with conservatives in the majority, but if Kelly loses to his liberal challenger, Judge Jill Karofsky, the Wisconsin Supreme Court will be balanced. It's interesting, referenced here as the Wisconsin SCOTUS. Of course, it isn't the Wisconsin SCOTUS. It's, you could say, the Wisconsin Supreme Court. It's the, let's see, I guess, could you make an acronym out of the Supreme Court of the state of Wisconsin? Instead of us, it would be state of Wisconsin, SO or SOW, Scotsow. How would you do that? All right, well, at any rate, the point here is Jill Karofsky, not the sitting justice, but the candidate to replace appointed conservative Justice Daniel Kelly. That's what's in the offing today, in addition to the primary election, which is of, for the people of Wisconsin, perhaps of less import. The judicial election, much more important. Furthermore, Semdem continues, the unpopular conservative Chief Justice will be up for re-election in 2023, a couple of years down the road, which paves the way to finally break the right-wing stranglehold on the Wisconsin court. Daniel Kelly is in the fight of his life as a prosecutor and judge. Karofsky has, have I got the pronunciation right? I might not even have that. Karofsky has focused on protecting the vulnerable, particularly those subjected to domestic violence and sexual assault crimes. She passionately advocates for criminal justice reform. Alternatively, the incumbent, Kelly, to no one's surprise, I suppose, is a right-wing extremist who's been enthusiastically endorsed by Donald Trump for overwhelmingly dispensing judgments in a partisan manner, even overturning precedent in doing so. It was this right-wing court that infamously carried out Walker's plan to gut union bargaining rights. Worst of all, this judicial election has national consequences because Trump and his cronies are proposing a monumental purge of Wisconsin voters using suspect data. If Kelly wins, the Wisconsin Supreme Court will no doubt allow the suppression of Democratic-leaning voters. Trump needs Wisconsin in order to win, and the Republicans know this. So this is yet another reason why the Republicans blatantly fought to force people to vote in person today. This was written yesterday, so tomorrow is the operative word. And force Wisconsin to throw out all the absentee ballots arriving after tomorrow. So once again, even people who have managed to succeed in securing mail-in ballots, if they're not in, you have to have a deadline clearly, but we do have some extraordinary circumstances here with the coronavirus, and we don't know how timely delivery of those ballots was in the first place or will be once they're completed, signed, and mailed in. But apparently, you can't count. I don't know whether they have a postmark rule or what, but I guess the mention of the rule here is Wisconsin will have to throw out all absentee ballots arriving after today. To be clear, many people still haven't received their mail-in ballots yet. That's the big problem. So their only choice now is risking their life to vote today in person, or just give up on their sacred right to vote. We're facing a pandemic, obviously, that we all know about. We haven't seen in 100 years. Yet the conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court were dead set against the reasonable accommodation to extend the absentee arrival deadline to April 13th. Now, yesterday, the day before the election, the Supreme Court of the U.S. is ordering ballots to be discarded, even though voters in Wisconsin were told that they had until April 13th. Well, apparently that's not going to be any good anymore. Plus, of course, the issue of cutting back on polling stations. As Ian mentioned, it's mentioned here in the diary as well. There are only 5 polling stations for the entire city of Milwaukee, a city of 600,000 people. And many poll workers are refusing to work at all, citing their own personal safety. So that'll slow things down even more. The governor is ordering the National Guard to serve in this capacity. It's utter madness, as Semdem puts it. If you're in Wisconsin and haven't voted yet, Semdem says, I'm not being dramatic when I say our democracy is at stake. The Republicans' assault on our press, our Constitution, and even our right to cast a ballot is sickening, treasonous, and un-American, all correct. But they don't care. And there's a bit more here. Shall we wind up? How much longer does this go on? Yes, we have time for this one, I think. Let's continue on. When I was serving overseas, I understood putting your life on the line to exercise our freedoms, but I never thought so-called American politicians would force ordinary citizens to do the same in their own country. I never saw them as the enemy, even though they were from a different party. Now I do. Please do take, and I join in Semdem in this sentiment, please take whatever precaution you need, but I beg you to vote. You must go out for essentials like groceries, but this is to save our nation. Wear a mask, wash your hands, cast the ballot, wash your hands again, then go home. Yes, you shouldn't have to risk your life, but the Republicans, if the Republicans are this evil in forcing you to make that choice so that they can stay in power the next time, you might not even have that choice to make. Ian's point exactly. And so that, I think, makes a nice way of closing out that segment, although I did want to go to Ian Millheiser's comment just in terms of the numbers about Milwaukee and their voting places. Milwaukee officials predicted 50,000 in-person voters, and there are only 5 polling places available for the predicted number to cast those ballots. That's 10,000 voters per site in the middle of a pandemic. Not an ideal situation, obviously. All right, so let's see. Any other things that we want to include here? Something from crucial Waukesha County. Do I have that right? Is it Waukesha County? I know it's the crucial one. Do I have the pronunciation right? I've had years to practice this, but I've had years to get ready for a pandemic, and I haven't done that either. But some video there as well. Interesting mix of those masked and not in the line, by the way. I don't know whether that's telling in any particular way or whether we can predict their partisan leanings based solely on that, but just thought that was interesting to look at. All right, another news around the world. Might as well update you on the fact that Boris Johnson, now in intensive care in hospital, as they say, over in London. And I will point this out. They have been very cagey about describing his situation, which makes me think only that it could only be worse than they're willing to state. I think I put aside in pocket, although to dig it out at this point is a real crapshoot. But somebody put together a tweet that went through the various stages of explanation / denial that Downing Street has gone through in describing exactly where or what was going on with Boris Johnson's health. But basically, they've been pretty untrustworthy all along. And in the last day or so, it's been, oh, well, he's going into the hospital, or rather, he's going in hospital. But it's only a precautionary measure. And then within a day, he's in intensive care. And it's like, well, I guess that was a pretty good precautionary measure. You've done a great job keeping an eye on his health as he's fallen into the critical care group now. And so I see this morning on CNN, this is how they describe what's going on in hospital for Boris. Here, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is receiving, quote, standard oxygen treatment. Yeah. Oxygen treatment that you go to the hospital for. I mean, I guess that could be describing a particular situation. They insist, though, that he is breathing without assistance and is not, has not required invasive or non-invasive ventilation and does not have pneumonia. So good news for him personally in his condition, I guess, if you believe it. What has put him in the critical care section in the intensive care unit, I don't know if he's doesn't require any invasive or non-invasive ventilation, is breathing on his own, doesn't have pneumonia, is just getting standard oxygen treatment, but we're doing it in the intensive care unit. I don't know. But all along, it's been the same story with him that, oh no, everything's fine. Okay, everything's not fine. We're just putting him in the hospital for no particular reason. We're just putting him in the intensive care for no reason. He doesn't need any extra help. And I don't know. Also noting for the record, once again, we don't really have any real news about Rand Paul and what's happening with him. I don't really hang on the edge of my seat about what's happening to Rand Paul, but I find it interesting that we haven't heard much. I would think that if pardon me, if the course of his illness was going relatively well, we would hear more about that. And I understand his Twitter account is active. I don't look. But I don't know if there's anybody that believes that isn't staff produced at this point. Anyway. Okay. In other coronavirus news, just because, we've been, I don't know, maybe my eye is drawn to the bad news at this point. But some of the signs that things were easing here and around the world are beginning to fall apart, and that's kind of concerning for me, and I guess just reiterates the need for extending this period of social distancing or whatever we're trying to call it. I don't think we ever settled on an alternative term for it. Maybe one just isn't needed. But let's see. I have news here. I saw that TPM reporting that Paris, France, not Texas, has banned outdoor workouts during busy daytime hours, which might just be a function of people's inability in a crowded landscape to maintain proper social distancing, but is a little bit worrisome. Getting outside was one of the few things that you were allowed to do to get outside for a little bit of exercise. Paris authorities have banned all outdoor sports activities between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. That's pretty much all day long, quite honestly. after Parisians took to the streets in numbers over the weekend to enjoy the sunny weather. We had a lot of nice weather on the East Coast here, and we saw a lot of resulting crowds, more closer together than you would hope for in New York City, in Washington, D.C., elsewhere. So maybe it's just that, but that seems pretty dramatic. 10 a.m. to 7 p.m., it's a pretty dramatic cutback. In the meantime, also seeing a resurgence in the numbers of asymptomatic carriers being detected in China at the same time while they're on their downward trajectory. Well, we'll be right back after another 2-minute break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. And now, in our last segment, joined by Joan McCarter. Good morning, Joan. How are you?
Good morning, Kagro.
Tell everybody how you are. I already know.
Do you mind if I call you Kagro?
No.
I always do. I always have.
There's really no way around it at this point. I don't know how that... It's really like 10 years since we all stopped with that, but that's an old habit. And well, it's the name of the show, so I guess it's okay. It probably helps because other people are confused. Why do you call your show that?
There are a lot of Davids too.
Yes, there are plenty.
Lots of Davids, particularly in our generation. So
yeah, and almost no Kagros at all, really.
No,
although I expect to see a surge in about 9 months from now as people have been home isolated and families staying together. They say there's going to be people are anticipating some sort of baby boom, and I would think it would be a great thing if that just became a given name for kids. Why not? It's unique.
I think it's an excellent idea.
Too many Madisons and Cheyennes and whatnot, as I think that one died out. Actually, Cheyenne, I think, never really stuck around. But a lot of Dakotas and Madisons, and etc.
In my little circle, Oakley is the name of the year.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a new one for me. I think my younger brothers had a cat named Oakley, but named for the basketball player. But so okay. Not the same thing, but that's an interesting new one. Nice. Okay. I hope it works out nicely for them.
I do as well.
All right. Well, what's new in your socially distanced world? It hasn't really changed the way we work, of course. So the product is still A1. I'm glad to report. But what's top of mind for you these days, or upcoming, perhaps?
There's just so much. I'm trying to balance sort of what happened in the last stimulus bill and how that's really not being implemented well by the Trump administration. Surprise, surprise.
Wow.
Who's trying to oversee that? And there's good news in that from Chuck Schumer.
Yeah.
And then what happens next? What do we put in the next one to because really all we can do is throw money at this, and we've got to make sure that the next one throws money at the right places.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Where would you like to start? We could start with the fact that the Small Business Administration and Treasury really kind of screwed up the huge small business lending portion of the law.
Sure. I mean, I did notice that there were some questions about it at the most recent press conference, and Trump just used it as an opportunity to scream about the press being unfair and you're terrible for asking. So we can start there.
Banks didn't even the small business lending portion of this, which was what I think 350 billion.
All right.
Was supposed to start on Friday. And as of Thursday morning, the banks hadn't received any direction. They didn't know how this was going to work at all. They finally got some communication from Treasury and Small Business Administration Thursday evening, and then had to open this thing up on Friday.
Yeah, all right.
So they've been completely overwhelmed. Wells Fargo, by the end of Saturday, said it had reached its limit and wasn't going to take any more. Chase and Bank of America had hardly brought stuff up by the weekend. Community banks, particularly the smaller banks, are really struggling. They can't even log on to the SBA system that's been set up.
What, a website that doesn't work immediately? That's impeachable.
Can you imagine? They're having to enter pages and pages of information from businesses to qualify for the loans manually into this database at the SBA. It's a mess.
Yeah.
Which we're not terribly surprised by. And then I find out just now that one of the things that the Small Business Administration has decided with this program is that they can lend money directly to churches.
Okay. Yes. Huh. That's interesting. I mean, I knew that they would have to eventually get around to that. At least, I thought they would do it under the guise of, making loans to nonprofits, and that would cover.
Nope, they're just going to go straight to the churches.
Okay.
As small businesses?
Well, it's their business model being what it is. I mean, people can't show up and put money on a collection plate if that's an important part of the way these congregations fund themselves. Of course, if you're then also flying around on private jets because you're a mega church pastor, then maybe you should be able to weather this. Who do you think
the churches are that is going to be receiving most of this?
Right. I mean, who's got staff ready to make applications to the Small Business Administration? The larger churches. Yeah. I mean, if it's your neighborhood church, they're certainly suffering, and I would like to see that there's a way to sustain them through this crisis. But for all the time that they put in Congress, making sure that the unworthies didn't get any of the stimulus money, I'm surprised that, not surprised / not surprised at all to find out that, maybe that they weren't so careful when it came to churches and finding differences. Or finding a way to differentiate between a neighborhood church that hasn't met and is going to, face dissolution and bankruptcy versus mega churches that have not only not stopped meeting, but are always raking it in and have more than enough for a rainy day. But no surprise there. And I suppose, all right, well, but does it pose any sort of constitutional problem to
does
be
it?
Paying? I don't know.
It just might. Just might. Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, the prohibition of any law respecting the establishment of religion, where taxpayer money is going directly to a church.
Right.
Forgivable loan, at least in part.
Yeah. All right. Well, it'll be interesting to see how we work that one. But, we love our churches here in America and Constitution, whatever. Yeah. All right. That'll be tough to work out.
So there's that one. The other part that's nice is that yesterday Chuck Schumer named a guy named Bharat Ramamurthy to the organization that the legislation created, the Congressional Oversight Commission. So there are a couple of layers of oversight that we're doing. Pelosi is creating a special committee within the House to oversee how the administration does this. But this was another one that's going to be bipartisan, bicameral, that was actually written into the legislation. Ramamurthy is a longtime Elizabeth Warren aide, who she hired on in 2013 specifically to oversee how Treasury and how the administration and how the banks were responding to Dodd-Frank and complying with Dodd-Frank. So the guy who was helping oversee the Great Recession is now going to help oversee this recession, and that's comforting, knowing that it's an Elizabeth Warren person who she trusted to do all of this.
Yes, I think so. That's I mean, it's hard to know exactly how you would even do this job at this point, but he'll have more of a clue than I would. So
than just about anybody, probably, and he'll have the support and the ear of Elizabeth Warren, which can't hurt.
Yeah.
Since, she had plans for all of this.
Yes, well, for everything. But okay.
For everything.
Yeah, and that's how she got
right
her
now,
person
though,
on
she had the plans for this.
Yeah. Well, I mean...
So that's good.
That's right. Having those plans sitting around, even if you don't get to be president, means that when you need the name of a person to get to work on a commission like this, you have them on hand, and so they call you.
Yeah.
So, well done there. No
well
surprise,
done there.
But we're
That's
happy
very
to hear
exciting.
Yeah.
any good news that we can find out of this, David? Any good news at all?
Honestly.
We also have an interesting survey out of the Kaiser Family Foundation, which shows a lot of what our civics poll that was released last week did.
Okay.
That we've got serious disruption in people's lives from this. Loss of income, worry about health, mental health issues. It's really overwhelming. And also partisan. You're not going to be terribly surprised.
Well, a lot of things are.
Yeah. They found a large partisan divide, their words, in the share of adults reporting taking precautions in reaction to the coronavirus outbreak.
Okay. I think
Democrats are still, it's less so in the last week that they conducted the polling than the first week of March when they conducted the polling.
Okay.
But Democrats are still more likely than Republicans to report sheltering in place. 90% of Democrats versus 74% of Republicans.
Yes, okay. Well,
preparing for this so that you don't have to go outside for emergencies. 72% of Democrats say they have versus 50% of Republicans.
I'm worried about what they consider to be an emergency too, but.
And 91% of Republicans report some form of social distancing, but if they're still running out to the store to get stuff, yeah.
Yes, and everybody is to some extent, although, I mean, a lot of people are taking more precaution about it and at least trying to minimize it. And I find that difference. I don't know the politics necessarily of the people I see in the neighborhood sometimes, but yeah, there seems to be a real difference between, well, the stores are still open, so we can just go as we need to, versus, you should be planning to, do it once for the week or something like that and minimize.
2 weeks.
Yeah. Oh, 2 weeks even. Yeah.
2 weeks.
If you've got a big enough freezer, yes. But yeah, you want to try and minimize that, and I guess not everybody's doing that. I wondered whether
not everybody's doing that. You wonder why. Could it be because their leaders were telling them, no big deal. It's the flu.
Well, either, it's some combination of that and, what do I really need here? The supermarkets have to stay open, so I'll just go when I want to. I guess you're probably seeing that if you have been out lately. If you've been out in the last couple of days, you would likely have seen a real difference or a real divide among people who are taking up the masking and those who are not. It's been real interesting.
The divide I've seen has been mostly gender.
Okay.
Yeah. driving by a basketball court outside a church
Oh.
that has a school the other day when there were, six late 20s, early 30s guys playing a game of pickup.
Yeah. Even the NBA not doing that, but you guys go ahead.
And, I did have to run into the store this weekend.
Yeah.
So I went at 9:00 right after it had closed for the seniors and disabled people only.
Right.
It was my local neighborhood store that's small, and man, they're on top of things. But there's this 30-something guy wandering around aimlessly in the aisles, talking to whoever's going by, not noticing 6 feet apart.
Yes.
Leaning on stuff in the store, picking stuff up, putting it back down.
Yes.
I wanted to punch him, but I would have had to have gotten within 6 feet of him to do it.
You could have thrown a can at him. I mean, I didn't suggest that. It just slipped out.
So I am, yes, I am sexist, but I'm seeing more women responding to this with what I would call appropriate care than I am younger men.
Yes, I can imagine that's easy to believe. I have seen some great comments, by the way, on Twitter about women saying, "Can we keep this thing afterwards where men can't come within 6 feet of you? Is that possible?" Yeah, it's a good point. It's good times for that, I guess. But yeah, I recently made it to the store again, and I noticed all the changes since I had been there last. Our grocery store has plastic shielding up between the customers and the cashiers. The self-checkout things, they've stretched some kind of, I don't know whether they're plastic bags or plastic over the keypads that you use to enter your number if you're using a debit card, or put in your phone number if you're a customer club thing or whatever, and they change them every hour. It's really amazing seeing. And then you mentioned leaning. I leaned on a counter. I was so upset with myself afterwards. And I went home and took off the clothes and chucked them in the wash. What am I doing? I'm touching things unnecessarily. But I'm trying to be very conscious of it.
Don't touch things. Yeah,
really?
My store, they've got the shields up. They don't even let you touch the key thing. So,
yeah.
Well, I guess they would. I have one of those tap cards.
I see. Okay.
So that I don't have to touch anything.
That's an idea.
Presumably somebody would have to, but they're really, really trying to focus on not letting you touch anything and having as minimal contact.
Yeah.
Within 6 feet of staff. So it's good to see places taking it seriously.
Yes.
I wish they would kick out people who aren't, but
Yeah, they can't quite afford, I'm sure, to do that. But it was interesting watching people who were masked and who wasn't, and sort of. I mean, I felt kind of ridiculous because the first trip that I had made to the store with masks and gloves, and seeing people who weren't, and saying, I'm sure they think I'm a lunatic. Of course, I think they're lunatics, but But yeah, I understand the idea, of course, that the mask isn't. I thought this might inspire more people to go ahead and do it. It's like, I'm not afraid of the virus. This won't protect me from the virus, the masks that I have. But for the people who are working here, who you're depending on to make sure that you can buy whatever it is you're there to get, they have to stay indoors, trapped with whatever all of you people are breathing out on them.
Right.
You should be
do it for them.
Yeah, right. If you feel ridiculous being in a mask, or if you're afraid it'll make you look like you're, I don't know, afraid of something or that you're wimpy in some way, remember that you're doing it for the people who have to stay there after you leave. And
yes.
We are seeing, I saw today, the first reports of grocery store workers now being diagnosed. I mean, I assume that was inevitable at some level, but first stories in the newspaper. And I would hope that they would take the opportunity to tell people, wearing the mask doesn't necessarily mean you're afraid of the virus. It just means you're glad that people are working so that you can get food, and you would like them to continue to be able to do so. That might be nice.
I think it's important to recognize in all of this, though, that there's certain privilege in being able to even wear a mask.
True. Also,
I'm
yes.
seeing a lot of talk from people of color, particularly young black men, who don't feel safe putting a mask on going out in public.
It is probably not for many
because of profiling from the cops. So this crisis is raising so many critical issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's
of privilege, of income inequality, of it's really highlighting.
Yeah, I mean, excellent point. I've certainly thought about that, but now we're also seeing in data indicating that the impact of the disease itself has been different among demographic groups and hitting the black community disproportionately. And I don't think it has anything to do yet with reluctance to wear masks, but rather just, access to care and living conditions, etc. But I mean,
and jobs that they're having, they're proportionately a higher population of them having to do service jobs, the lower paying service jobs that put them out there vulnerable. Underlying health conditions, because, you know, we've seen certainly in the past decade how much access to health care is a racial thing. I don't think that right now states have done a very good job of releasing information demographically of who's being most hit, who's dying, because, you know, they're having to keep up with all of this. But certainly anecdotally, we're seeing a higher percentage in populations, in neighborhoods that are of people of color. So
it's been very rough, and I'm sure it's enough for the states just to keep account of what's going on and trying to figure out where resources are needed. But
and just, you know, fight the Trump administration to try to get the masks and gowns that they need for their hospitals.
Right. Well, fighting the administration, fighting one another, fighting profiteers, fighting international pirates now,
who might be
our guys,
Trump administration people, or Trump affiliated people, or Jared Kushner's buddies.
Yes, right. It's insane what's happening, and when the books are finally written, it's going to be amazing. And most of the people will at one point be beyond prosecution for whatever reason. But yeah, when we find out what's actually happening out there, the stories of just mysterious American figures with wads of cash showing up on airport tarmacs and diverting cargo with payoffs. And who are they? I don't know. Are they official? We don't know. Did they tell you who they were? No. They
just gave me money and I took it.
Right.
Gave them the masks. Yeah. This is not how it's supposed to go.
No, and even though we have officials standing at the press conferences saying, this is how it's supposed to go, this is how it's always gone. I don't remember who that was, but one of the public health officials saying, oh, no, we always have FEMA procuring equipment from overseas and paying for its transportation and paying for its procurement and then giving it to private middlemen.
Always, Bill.
I've never heard that before. No, well,
we're about to have a dog explosion. I apologize.
Okay. Well, they want to get on the game. Yeah. Well, there's profits to be made, and your dog's smart. I understand.
Interesting polling too from KFF. This reminds me of what Americans expect out of their government, and 60% of Americans of all stripes think that, the federal government is supposed to be the ones in charge of this kind of thing.
That is weird.
And yet 52% of them say, no, it's not the Trump administration that's in charge. It's my governor. It's my state.
It's been very shocking. Because I would imagine that most people would have thought, oh, absolutely, FEMA. We know what that is. We know what the F in FEMA is.
They shouldn't be terribly surprised when they see that the response to Hurricane Maria is paper towels.
True. Well, that would be a great response right now, though. If people were throwing paper
We
towels.
need them.
Yeah. Finally,
Toilet paper would be better.
there's something for you to do here. Throwing paper products would be a big help, and he's nowhere.
Yeah.
But okay. This has been really startling watching the administration stand there and say, what are you looking at us for? We're just the federal government.
At this point, I'm more astounded that we still have traditional media showing up to these things and airing them live. They've gotten better. CNN particularly has gotten better about cutting away when Trump's talking.
That's good.
And only showing the experts. But really, there is no need to give him this daily rally, because that's all they are at this point. They're not press conferences. They're not imparting information. It's Trump talking about hydroxychloroquine.
Yes. We are learning to pronounce that. That's
Yeah.
one upside. No, I don't know what it's good for, but yeah, there's really not only been no news, but it's. I was just thinking about the term itself. I haven't really ever given it a thought. Press conference. What kind of conference is this? I ask you a question and you say, "Shut up, you're a terrible questioner," and then move on. Why are you going? I understood that they felt like it was their job, but if they're not getting answers, or the answers are just attacks, I would love
It
to
seems
see
like their
something.
job would be not that.
Yes. Or
Their job would be communicating directly with people who know something
I guess that's true too.
for real.
Is anyone else gonna?
So,
get the microphone?
this is my ongoing rant.
Yeah.
Why in the world are they letting Trump do this, and why are they continuing to play the game? I think that there has been value in particularly Michelle Cinder and other journalists of color, particularly women, who stand up to him, who try to push him on this.
Yes.
But I don't know when we reach the point of diminishing returns, when it's not obvious to everybody that, this is a racist, sexist guy, but airing his lies is continuing to harm people.
Yeah. I feel like they're waiting for us to suggest some kind of, or someone to suggest some sort of alternative that they think they can implement. I don't know what exactly has been wrong with the suggestions they've gotten. I guess at this point, I really like to see them just. I want to see them. People say they want them to stop covering or walk out. I wouldn't, if they're going to stay. I think all the rules are off under these conditions. They should boo audibly when the first person gets attacked. The rest of the staff, the reporters, boo.
Don't let that happen. Stand together. The other thing, the White House Correspondents Association, who was supposed to be in charge of who was in that room, banned the ONN reporter.
Yes.
Last week.
Didn't work.
And she keeps showing up.
How does she do this? Because she's a reliable, more than a softball. She's
not even softballs, crazy conspiracy theories.
Right. They've been very.
But apparently Stephanie Grisham, who I've heard this morning is now out as press secretary, having never once briefed the press.
Congratulations, you made it.
Yeah. She keeps inviting her in, so she says, okay, I can get it, even though she's banned. That's enough to make them boycott this thing.
She's banned, and Grisham's not the press secretary, but she's letting the banned person in. And what authority, I don't know, but okay. Obviously, Trump wants them there. And their conspiracy theories have gotten even worse of late, as I understand.
Well, and apparently beyond that, she refuses to stay within or stay outside of 6 feet of people. She's a problem in actually being a physical danger to them.
Yes.
In a time of contagion.
That is
so.
New challenge.
Yeah, it's nuts. That's my ongoing rant.
It's a good one.
And the Congress needing to figure out how they're going to work remotely. They have taken measures to not have staff actually passing physical paper on the floor anymore. They're going to be transmitting all of their necessary paper electronically. So at least we've gotten that far.
Okay, well that's a step in the right direction. But as we look forward to the possibility of another phase 4, I guess, relief bill, I guess they have to figure out, well, how would we do this and how will we vote on it? They're doing some collaborative.
If we want the people of Wisconsin to be able to vote on paper, then yeah, we need to figure out how the House is going to do it and the Senate.
All right, well, it's time for them to get that work done. I imagine they must have been working on something, although, it's good they kept the cards close to the vest, perhaps. But I hope this silence also includes, yes, we are actively considering it. We just don't want to tip our hand just yet. We'll find out soon enough.
I hope so, too.
Okay.
We'll know more next week.
Oh, good. All right. Well, then now we know what we can do next week. It's a plan. I'll hold you to it. Congress, Speaker Pelosi, make sure Joan has the information she needs to bring this to us next week. And if not, I'm holding you accountable in some fashion. Okay.
That'll do the trick, I'm sure.
There, she heard that. You set her straight. Thank you, Joan, for giving me
You're
the backbone
welcome.
to do that. I appreciate it.
Next week.
Stay well, and we'll talk to you again next week. Thanks again for coming by.
From Daily Co's Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Justice Putnam comes up next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Lots to catch up on and lots of stories we haven't been able to touch, including the fact that now everybody with a brain wants the acting Secretary of the Navy out, just as we should, and news from Canada where their outrage is beginning to build at what we've been doing to them.